This is Live from the Table, recorded at the world-famous Comedy Cellar, coming at you on Sirius XM 99, Raw Dog, and the Laugh Button Podcast Network. Dan Naturman here, out of isolation from Omicron. It took about 2 weeks for the symptoms to completely go away. I was in the middle of licorice pizza, about halfway through, when all of a sudden I said to myself, you know, I think the symptoms are gone, because I was a little bit fatigued going into the movie. But then about halfway through, I felt myself again. Noam Dworman is joining us from an undisclosed location via Zoom in Westchester County. Periel Aschenbrand is here, our producer. Once again, Periel, we'd love to hear what you have to say, but please refrain from changing the subject. And we are joined by comedian Zarna Garg, who is making some waves in the business. She's a new Comedy Cellar comedian. And hold on a second. Where the hell is the, Periel, you sent me her bio. Well, you know what, Zarna, why don't you tell us what you're up to? I know you won the Kevin Hart, something with Kevin Hart.
Yeah, he had a show. First of all, namaste. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, namaste.
And yeah, now it's a white people thing now, namaste. So
sure.
I'm learning. He had a competition called Lyft Comics.
L-I-F-T?
L-Y-F-T.
Oh, like
so
the car company.
Uber, Lyft.
Okay.
Which was filmed out in New Jersey, where the comedians had to drive a Lyft and pick up passengers and make them laugh.
Oh, that's so funny.
And the passengers would rate us. They had no idea we were comedians. So the passengers rated us, and then whoever had the highest ratings.
Well, so you were driving?
Yeah, we were driving all day.
That is hilarious.
Driving around like the suburbs of New Jersey, picking up people.
But you were the driver, or you were?
I was the driver and the like, you know how some Uber drivers just talk, and it was kind of that vibe, at least in my car.
Oh, okay.
Because the minute somebody sat down, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get the jokes in. And it just kept going.
So it was like Cash Cab, but for comedy.
Exactly.
And who was the camera guy?
The car was outfitted with all kinds of cameras. There was no people with us. It was just me and a passenger, and so two people. But the car was like, it was like the G.I. Joe of cars. They had everything in it.
And so then afterwards, you said to the customer, by the way, this was for a comedy competition. Please sign here for the release.
I actually didn't say anything. They did all this thing because we had to keep going and picking up passengers. So when we drop people, they must have signed off on stuff. And
so where can we see this? It sounds like a lot of fun.
It is streaming on Peacock. And I believe it's now on the LOL Network YouTube channel as well.
How fun.
Yeah.
And Zarna, you also have a movie did I read correctly? A movie in development.
Yeah, that's right.
So what's
that's the first screenplay I wrote. I'm a self-taught screenwriter. So, I wrote a rom-com. It's a very classic rom-com, but set in the Indian world. It's a story of how I came to America, and, it won the top comedy feature award at Austin Film Festival in 2019. And it's being made now.
What's it called?
Rearranged. So I was almost gonna be arranged at 15, which is not uncommon. It's not very common, but it's not uncommon in India. Certainly not 25 years ago. And I was almost arranged, and I found my way out of it, which in hindsight was a mistake. There are days now where I was like, I should have just gotten arranged. It was easier. You marry like an old rich dude, and that's it. You take care of his mother.
Well, if you are lucky enough to be arranged with an old rich dude.
That's the whole premise behind the arrangement. It's usually
always,
but not everybody has that choice. If you're not from a family of high, well-born, you may not have that choice. You have to take who you can get.
Well, I mean, rich is a spectrum, right? Would have been richer than whatever we were in life, and so it would have been fine. But
does the caste system still bear down on Indian culture?
Of course it does. Nothing changes. I mean, but maybe 10 million people in urban India will be like, we don't believe in it. But the remaining 900 million are still pretty much subscribers.
So what caste is my wife?
She's not in any caste. She's half Puerto Rican.
Well, I'm talking about her Indian caste.
No,
well, we asking Zarna for. How would Zarna know?
She could probably tell us by looking at her.
My guess would be that she's part of the merchant community, same as me. That's the vast majority of all Indians. If her dad is not a priest praying all the time, then she's not a priest caste. And if they're not out fighting wars, which I don't think they were, they're not warriors. So like it's down.
How many castes are there? How many castes are there? 4 castes.
Well, then there's the untouchable caste.
Then
is that a
the
caste or is that no? That's just when you don't not
No,
in any caste.
that's a real caste, but untouchable caste rarely makes it out of India. Like that the leap from India to anywhere out of India is so unlikely that you could bet against.
So how did you make it to this country?
So I'm part of the merchant community, whatever, but I came here to study. My sister was living in America, so I came here, to get an education. Which also, in hindsight, I was like, what was I thinking? It was easier when I didn't know stuff.
By the way, this is an example of worlds colliding. Zarna knows my sister because my nephew, my sister's son, and Zarna's daughter went to the same school. They went to Horace Mann, and they were friends there.
Yeah.
No way.
So my sister said to me, Zarna's, Zarna, and at the time I didn't, but then she wound up here. But you're not friends with my sister. You just kind of know her because your kid is friends with her kid.
Well, we cross paths and like all the mom is stuff. We were parents together in the same class for over a decade. So we cross paths a lot more than you might imagine.
Oh, okay.
A lot of parent teacher, in America also parents are involved a lot more. Like in India, you give birth, you forget to get them married at 15, 16. Here, it's every year. Another, whatever the report card day is called in America.
So what made you so you got an education. What were you doing prior to stand-up?
I was a stay-at-home mom for 16 years. So, and I taught myself how to write a screenplay. And even after winning the top award, I couldn't get anybody to read it.
Wow.
That's part of what made me think hard, like what I should do when I was really struggling. And my kids, the same daughter who's friends with your nephew, was like, she's all American. So she's like, Mom, just do stand-up comedy, make jokes about your script. And that's the first time I thought, like, what? Who's going to listen to what I have to say?
Well, this is a lesson to, I guess, aspiring screenwriters in a way, is that stand-up, if you have the aptitude for it, stand-up is always a good way to get attention for yourself as a writer, if you can do it. It's just a way to get yourself in front of people. A lot of writers do stand-up, and this is how they then get attention. And then they'll get hired as a writer because they got attention for themselves as a stand-up. So that's a strategy that people do use.
But it's a very different skill set.
Yeah, well, no, but there's a lot of overlap. A lot of writers are stand-up.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, a ton of writers are stand-ups. It's a different skill, but no, because as a stand-up, you're writing the shit that you're saying.
I know, but as somebody who wrote for years, I think that you're a stand-up and you're a writer. I think that there are more comics who are also writers than writers who are also stand-ups.
That's accurate.
That may be.
That's accurate. I in my case, I just didn't know I was a comic until, like, I really didn't. I've been making jokes my whole life. Now, again, in hindsight, been giving away the comedy gold. But to the point that Dan was making, I think today there's a lot more ways to put your voice out there.
Yeah.
So if you're not a traditional stand-up comedian, they're digital comedians doing all kinds. If you can make funny tweets, you're gonna get attention.
Yeah.
So there are ways to just not be waiting for the phone to ring and actually be proactive.
Speaking of tweets, this leads us into Noam is yawning. Noam hates it when we talk about comedy because
I'm tired. I'm tired.
I don't know if you know this about Noam, but he's a comedy club owner who doesn't really like comedy.
I like to laugh.
He likes to no, but you know what? Noam, I mean, I don't know if you know the story of the Comedy Cellar. Just very briefly, Noam basically tripped and fell into this because his father owned the club, and his father tripped and fell into it because he was a restaurant owner, and there was a basement, and somebody came and said, "Let's do a comedy show here." Now, that being said, Noam has the wherewithal to have grown the club. I want to give Noam the full credit he deserves. His father did a great job, and then Noam took it to another level because Noam's a good businessman, whether he loves comedy or not. Like if you go to the Stand, those guys are comedy fans, the owners of the Stand, and that's why they got into the business. But Noam it was more of a music guy.
But are they really in the business? I feel like the Comedy Cellar is in the center of the comedy.
Well, it
business.
is, but Noam doesn't care.
So maybe that's why he's in the center of, like,
Well, because he's a good businessman. When he does something, he likes to do it right.
Mhm.
I mean, Noam, what is your motivation to make the Comedy Cellar as great as it is?
I don't know, Glenn. It's a good question. I do love show business. I love putting on good shows. I do love. No, you're right. I don't love comedy. I don't. You know what? I don't think most. I don't think most comedians love comedy. I love a good show, and the truth is, what I mean to be. Just so you know, so like when I had a music club, for most of I had a few music clubs, and the club that I cared about most, my band played in, and I loved that. But then I had the Village Underground, where we used to book a lot of famous acts, like Ike Turner and whoever the
Ike Turner, Jesus.
It was just reminded me of an act, Michelle and Degucello, and like big national acts would come through that I didn't get any enjoyment out of that. Like I didn't care like that I owned the club that these great musicians were playing at, or Little Steven, from the Sopranos and the Springsteen band. He used to do every Monday night. And I didn't get that much pleasure out of that. I get way more pleasure out of comedy than I used to get out of presenting other bands and stuff. So I don't know what motivates me. I don't know.
This is a more fun version. This is like you're getting more pleasure out of comedy.
Well, why was it more pleasure doing the comedy than the music?
Because music's loud and most of it is just not pleasant, and I don't know. So I mean, I love music, but I didn't necessarily love owning a club that had music. I love playing music.
Yeah, you like playing music.
Yeah, I love comedy as much as the next guy, but it's not like I had this dream to be, having a club where comedians play. I love hanging out with the comedians. I mean, my motivation really, Dan, is to, there's a lot of things that come into business that have nothing to do with comedy. Like I did computer coding, and I do the video montage, and I do the website, and decorating and presenting the sound and the lights and picking things out, and the bathroom fixtures, whatever it is. These are all interesting things to do, and just to be moving forward on something. And then also it gives me a lot of freedom to do other stuff I like to do, which is like read, and I don't know.
I think you also take great pride in doing something very well, don't you? Like making sure that it's the best that it can be.
Yeah, of course. It has to be the best it can be. It has to be the best.
Well, no, I don't think that other people say that.
No, they don't. That's I don't understand. I don't understand how the other clubs operate. Like you go into other clubs and the sound isn't good, and the lights are lighting up. There's shadows and there's lights on parts of the wall that clearly there's no reason they should be lit up, and there's light bulbs out, and it's just all kinds of things. It's like they don't even care. It's like they love comedy so much they don't care about anything else. They just want to sit there and like be fanboys or something. You're running a business here. Like I don't know what do you think motivated Ziegfeld? He loved showgirls. Like he loved the.
Well, I guess you could say the same thing about Louis B. Mayer. I mean, was he a movie fan, or he's just trying to run a business? And and in his case, I think it was just because he couldn't get any other job. He was an immigrant Jew, and movies were a business that was kind of new and open to everybody.
Well, clearly Harvey Weinstein wasn't in it for the movies.
Oh my God.
But I was about to get into.
Can we just talk about the elephant in the room?
What's that?
Why is Periel wearing a mask? First of all, she struck out trying to avoid COVID. She caught it twice with all her fucking. She's like so cautious. She caught it twice.
Am I supposed to take this off now?
Now you have super immunity. You're triple vaccinated and you've had COVID twice. What are you worried about?
I'm worried about, I don't know. There's apparently some other fucking strain making its way over here.
You've had HPV, you got herpes, and you've had your ovaries removed. Why is he wearing a condom? What are you worried about?
You really think I can take this off now?
Absolutely.
You know, you are really a piece of work. You know that? Like, it's just unbelievable because if I came in here without a mask on, you would be like, you see, I told you weren't being careful.
No, that's ridiculous. You weren't careful. You got COVID.
I
Now
was careful.
Now you're not careful enough. And now you're being careful when you have immunity.
Okay, first of all, I don't appreciate that. And it's not fucking accurate. What do you mean not careful enough? I was the most careful, which is what every single person we know has said to me. I can't believe Periel got COVID again. She's the most careful person we know.
I think not careful enough is self-evident considering the fact you got COVID.
Well,
or
Omicron is pretty tough to avoid. I mean, Noam's avoided it so far. Noam's the most careful person, probably.
He has 47 vaccines.
Well,
the
vaccine doesn't seem to stop Omicron. But
I wear an N100 mask. Well, let's just talk about this. I'm sorry, Zarna, but
no.
Here's the thing. A few days before New Year's, I was scheduled to do a podcast with Modi. You know Modi?
Yeah.
He's kind of like the Jewish Zarna.
Yeah.
And
that's amazing.
And she said, are you coming to the podcast? I'm like, of course I'm not coming to the podcast. Positivity is like at 18% right now. I'm not going into a little studio to do a podcast today. And she says, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go do it. And I think, well, I don't think you should. I said to her, I don't think you should. And then a few days later, she got COVID. Now, I don't know where she got COVID.
He's talking about me, by the way.
Yeah, but hold on. Now, you can say you didn't catch it at that podcast. That may be true. Maybe the numbers don't line up. The point is that
oh no, wait.
It's an analogy for other decisions you certainly made.
Wait a second. First of all, I already had COVID when I went to do that podcast that I didn't know about. I was already.
I just said you may not have caught it that day, but the point is,
but I
saying it was indicative of the chance.
Why nobody else at that podcast got COVID? Modi and Leo don't have COVID, and I had my mask on.
She has trouble thinking like. She has trouble zooming out from a specific to a pattern. Like I'm trying to say there's a pattern there that whatever arithmetic you went through and said, yeah, I can do this podcast. You did that arithmetic in other situations that week. And one of them got you COVID.
No,
let me ask you, how do you know what I tell Zarna, you know what I call her? The Virgin Mary of COVID. She got it. But she didn't fuck anybody. She never caught it. She just got it.
You know what? All of this is such a crock of shit because you know better than anyone, given the fact that you were the only person I saw for 18 months, right? I mean, was I careful? Why am I the only person you designated allowed into the house?
How did you get COVID, Periel?
My doctor thinks that I got it from doing a show, that I got it from being on stage. No, but I keep my mask on except on stage. And she said she thinks that it doesn't matter.
Except on stage.
Okay. But how was I supposed to
I think it's fair to say that Periel is pretty careful, but one can always be more careful. Now, Noam goes to the extreme, and we'll see if Noam's able to avoid COVID. But Periel's, she's not perfecally careful.
I mean,
she's not as careful as Noam is.
If I get, for instance, I had I'm sorry, Zarna. I had an exposure a couple weeks ago when I ate outside with somebody who had turned out to have COVID.
You also ate inside with somebody who turned out to have COVID.
No, I didn't do that.
Yes, you did. Me.
Well, that's because you said I let you in my house when you said you didn't have COVID. So I ate outside. Now, if I'd caught COVID from that person, I would have had to say, I wasn't careful enough. I took the risk that he didn't have it, and being outdoors was protective enough. And it turned out I didn't catch it, but I took a little risk. You were taking a lot of risks. Go ahead, Zarna.
I don't understand this line of logic because you can get it anywhere. I take the subway every day to come here and do 10 other things. You can get it.
Thank you, Zarna.
Unless you're not going to go anywhere at all. And even then I know people who got it. People who didn't leave their room.
No, especially this variant is you can get it like that. But what I'm saying is that, what I was really saying is take off the mask, Periel. You already had COVID.
You promise I can't get Omicron again?
I can't promise you. I can only say that it's very, 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 very unlikely that you would get it again. Now, you don't know you had Omicron. That's part of the problem.
No, I think it's pretty clear that it was Omicron.
Well, if the main symptoms were like stuffiness and cold-like symptoms, then they say that that's Omicron. If that was what your symptoms were.
Even in somebody triple boosted?
Yeah.
Probably, but I'm not sure.
You probably had Omicron, and by that this was around you got it around the 21st of December.
No, I tested positive on the test that I took December 20th. I had taken two.
I would say that's about the 21st. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
All right, whatever.
Can we perhaps talk about Chappelle and Patton Oswalt?
Yes.
Or Licorice Pizza? Which?
I don't know what Licorice Pizza is.
Well, Licorice Pizza is a movie that I saw. I finally saw a movie for the first time since the pandemic. I had a couple of thoughts about it. So you want to hear those thoughts? You want to talk about Patton and Chappelle?
I want to hear your thoughts if they're brief.
They're brief-ish. First of all, I would say that Paul Thomas Anderson has come a long way since Boogie Nights, but it's a long way down.
Wow.
Maybe that was a little too harsh, but I thought it was clever anyway. So I said
that was clever.
No, I thought it was a mess. I thought it was a bunch of. Did you see it, Nicole? Nicole?
I did not see it. No.
Did anybody see it?
No.
Okay. Well, there was a lot of really interesting scenes thrown together, but no real story that I could ascertain. But the main point I wanted to make about Licorice Pizza is that the lead actors, Cooper Hoffman, who's Philip Seymour Hoffman's son, and Alana Hayim, who's a musician. Do you know her?
Yes.
No.
Her and her sisters have a band. This was their first acting gig, apparently. And they both did a great job. Yeah, well, so once again, it comes down to the point that we've made, or the question that we've posed numerous times. What exactly is acting? What is the skill involved? How hard is it? Is it something you can either do or you can't? I mean, there's two questions. One question is, how hard is it? And then the second question is, can it be taught? Or you just have it or you don't? Because as we've said many times, you couldn't pick up a guitar for the first time ever and convince anybody that you knew how to play the thing. But we've seen so many cases of people that really aren't actors in terms of their training or in terms of their work, and they do a pretty fucking good job.
Yeah, we'll also have to factor in that in the movies, it's like a recording studio. You have unlimited takes, so you can maybe get it right. Like you can take a mediocre guitarist and you give him enough time in the studio, he will come out with a great guitar solo. But if he's a live musician, it would be pretty obvious this guy's mediocre, you know. So stage acting is probably more of a clear talent than movie acting, I would say.
Well, that's an interesting point. And yet still, you know, I still think it's that still leaves a question of how teachable is it? And we know people like Judah Friedlander that I don't think ever took an acting class, that he was in the movie, what was it, American Splendor, you know, and did a good job. Then there's my star turn in Crashing, which everybody said was at least pretty good.
Weren't you playing yourself?
Yeah, I was playing myself.
Well, Ray Romano went from, I wouldn't call it bad acting, but from, you know, workman-like acting in his first season of Everyone Loves Raymond to becoming a fine actor, such a fine actor that Martin Scorsese casted him for a role based on an audition, not knowing he didn't know who Ray Romano was. He just saw the audition and chose Ray Romano for a part, and only found out later, because he doesn't watch TV apparently, only found out later that Ray Romano was
I don't know that, I mean, well, you said that Ray Romano started off like at a lower level of act. I mean, I don't know. He started off on his TV show, which I thought was, his acting was certainly.
No,
good.
He got way better as the seasons progressed on a TV show.
Zarna, is your script designed for you to be in it?
No.
Okay.
It's a teenage love.
Oh, it's a teenage love story. All right.
But to your point, doesn't everybody act a little bit in their life? Unlike playing a guitar, which you may not touch ever. Most people act a little.
Periel, that includes faking orgasms.
Sorry, I was distracted. I'm trying to look up Patton Oswalt thing with the, what'd you say about orgasm?
No, never mind.
Zarna said most people act in their lives, and Noam said that includes faking orgasm.
I don't think I fake orgasms.
Have you never have?
I'm sure I have.
Okay. So the Paul Thomas.
Haven't you?
No, I have not. Paul Thomas and I fake not having them. Paul Thomas Anderson. Paul Thomas Anderson had directed There Will Be Blood, which I think is one of the finest movies ever made. I think that movie is just off the charts fantastic. Daniel Day-Lewis is unbelievable in that.
I still say Boogie Nights was his best, in my opinion.
Boogie Nights is great too.
That was enjoyable, but
Licorice Pizza is getting a lot of buzz.
yeah, it's getting a lot of buzz, and I think it's because it's Paul Thomas Anderson and he's so respected, and it's quirky. It's weird. The female lead is not classically attractive. I mean, I think she's cute, but she's not classically beautiful. And I think he's getting quirky points that I don't know that I don't know how merited it is, in my opinion. I just thought it's some interesting stuff thrown together, and some good 70s nostalgia and some good music.
I've talked about this before, but it's really interesting. If you go on the internet and you can look up the reviews for various movies and see how wrong or right they were over time, like Godfather 2 was poorly reviewed, Rocky was poorly reviewed. That first Batman movie with Michael Keaton, which was just awful, was considered like a masterpiece when it came out. So there is a lot of things that go into the atmosphere that creates reviews that people don't. It's hard to see until you zoom out from it time wise. So you're probably right about these quirky points and things like this. Time will have a way of being unkind.
I mean, it could be that the public loves the movie and that I'm the odd man out. But
it is a good movie. It was quirky. It was good. I just saw it recently with my daughter. It was Heathers.
Oh, I like
yeah,
that.
that was great.
I mean, that's going back.
Yeah. That's
quite a
really
few years.
Good. It's still pretty good with Christian Slater and what's her name? Winona Ryder.
Well, I mean, Zarna, by the way, just getting back to your point that we all act in life. I mean, we all lie, which I think is harder than acting, because when you're lying, there's something at stake. You might get found out. So that, people say, well, I've heard the point made like, well, just pretend, just lie, it's like acting. And it's like, no, it's actually quite a bit harder, I think, because you're worried about getting found out. And so that's much more stressful. And so it's harder to do it.
Do you think, I don't think I'm phony in any way. I really don't think I am.
You should work on that.
Good one, Periel. Now, of course, my position in life, my station, as it were, permits me that,
You don't have to kiss anybody's ass.
Yeah, I don't really have to account to anybody or even kiss anybody's ass is part of it, or just I don't depend on anybody I don't need to be in anybody's good graces. But I don't know if I could actually do that. I think I'd have a hard time with it, especially now.
Like, what about like your wife or your in-laws?
Oh,
No.
please.
Oh, please, what?
I mean, I think that there's no internal monologue. Like, maybe I shouldn't say that because it'll upset.
I'm not phony.
Right. And Zarna said, well, what about your wife or your in-laws?
I think she meant, what about with your wife or your in-laws?
She meant, do I interact with them? Do I tone it down for them? And I'm like, no, I don't.
Sometimes you have to be nice just because you have to be nice to your spouse or their parents, or you don't want to, but you're kissing ass in a different way.
I always want to be nice to my in-laws.
Is that true?
I don't interact with Noam and his in-laws.
I think that he's nice. It's not, I mean, sometimes he's not nice, but it's not because he's trying to not be nice. I think it's because there really is no internal monologue.
No, I mean, Noam will refrain from saying certain things.
Really? Yes, I have not encountered that.
Of course he will. Of course.
We encounter it every minute, Periel.
But he doesn't say things, I guess, as far as I know, that are untrue, but he will refrain from saying things. I think, Noam, you would agree with that.
Yeah, yeah. Like, for instance, like if I go to somebody's show I like if they invite me backstage, that is like one of the things I hate most in life.
Yeah.
Because that's a time when you're going to have to be phony, presumably. From time to time you don't, but phony in the sense that it doesn't, you know what you're going to have to say before you even see the show. You know, it's like there's nothing about the show which has anything to do with what you're going to say after you see it.
Hysterical.
And so I hate.
Yeah, but when you went backstage to meet Mick Jagger, I assumed you enjoyed the show enough that you could have been, that you didn't have to fake it.
No, I didn't meet Mick Jagger, but I did get invited backstage to see David Lee Roth after the Van Halen concert, and I didn't go.
But didn't you? I thought you were invited backstage when Sasha was singing. With,
no, I was backstage. I was backstage before the show, and maybe after show, but I didn't meet Mick Jagger. I was offered to be introduced to Keith Richards, but I declined. Not because I was afraid of being phony. I could have been sincerely talk about how fantastic he is, but because I didn't want to impose on the guy. He doesn't want to meet me, Well,
that's Noam's philosophy here at the Comedy Cellar. You don't want to meet the big name comics that come in. You don't make an effort to meet them or to talk to them.
I say hi and that's it. Yeah, I don't make an effort to talk to them. Yeah. They don't want to be bothering me.
Well,
I'm right about that, aren't I?
Pardon?
I'm right about that. They don't.
I don't know if you're right, but it can't hurt, I guess, to err on the side of caution. They might well want to talk to you.
Well, why else would they come and hang out here? Why else would they hang out in the cafe if they didn't want to say hi and talk to you?
No, they
want to talk to their friends. Like if Chris Rock is here with Kevin Hart.
Well, they can talk to each other in their homes all the time. No one's going to stop them. They all have big, gigantic homes. They choose to come here.
Well, because it's a great environment, right? He's created.
But that doesn't mean they want to see Noam. I mean, yes, there's a lot that's great about this environment, but that might not include Noam.
Imagine like Kevin Hart and Keith and whoever else is sitting at the back table and say, "Hey, Kev, how you doing? Come here. I want to talk to you for a minute." I mean, he'd be like, "What the fuck?" Now, if Keith went up to him and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you for a minute," he goes, "Sure." Or there's any number of people will go up to Kevin Hart and say, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" If you have Norton, any of them would. If I go up to him, he's like, "What the fuck?" And then he'd have to, right? Because I'm the owner. He's not going to insult me. So it's like, whatever.
So that's one of Noam's, but Noam, that's one of the, would you consider one of the secret sauces of the Comedy Cellar is to create an environment that you think is most comfortable for the comics? And that includes you staying the hell away from them.
Yeah. Now, like there's certain comedians I have a relationship with, like if Jon Stewart comes in, because I knew him so well when he was, before he was famous, that's a comfortable thing. I'm sure he is happy to sit down and talk to me because we knew each other.
I mean, a lot of them are. You're being modest. I mean, I know you're being genuine.
I'm not being modest. I'm not even sure Jon Stewart wants to talk to me, but it wouldn't be that uncomfortable because I actually knew him. I actually had a relationship.
I had the thought that if I ever become famous, and it's looking grim, obviously, it would be interesting to see how, if at all, Noam's behavior toward me changed, if at all. That would be interesting to me to see that. It probably will never get to see that. But it would be interesting to me because Noam likes to rib me and insult me and in a loving way. But I wonder if that would change at all.
That's my prime motivation to become uber.
Yeah, I mean, if Periel, that would be even more interesting because Noam really lays into Periel, and if it's a devastating way.
This is like a movie script.
And I'm wondering what would Noam, if Periel became famous, would Noam all of a sudden have to be respectful toward her, or he just could? I don't think he could do it.
Val, it's Naturman. Get him a drink.
But neither of those scenarios are, alas, unlikely.
Speak for yourself.
No, I'm speaking for you.
I just had a nice profile written up about me. Speak for yourself.
Look, no one's ever become famous who I was quite as friendly with as Naturman. So,
well, yes,
yeah, none of this, so it might not come between us. I don't know, but like. Even the people I knew who became famous, like Jon Stewart and Ray Romano or whoever else, or Chappelle, even who used to come and sit in with the band sometimes, we would never like just hang out, the two of us that I can remember. So
I think that in this room, the most likely person to become famous, Ms. Zarna Garg.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know if it's likely. Obviously, becoming famous is never likely. but it can be more likely. I mean, what's your goal precisely? You just want to make a nice living as a writer?
Much more likely to become infamous. Because if
No,
I'm doing
don't be
anything,
silly.
I'm like bringing shame to like 1 billion people back home. But
Yeah, but Aziz is doing the same thing. And
no,
right.
Aziz was born and raised here.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
He
very.
doesn't carry that obligation, and he's not a woman.
Yeah, I was just gonna say Zarna's a woman too, and
I'm
she's a mom.
I'm a mom. You know how much hate I get?
Oh, do you really? But that, of course,
My
that could
husband,
yeah.
poor thing. He's like, you let your wife do this?
really. They say that.
Of course they do.
Wow.
They threaten my in-laws back home.
And so why are you so motivated to do it, despite the fact that that you're causing this reaction? You must be really, really motivated. Where does that come from?
I myself trying to figure it out. How I'm sitting here is a big mystery to me. My all-American kid said, Mom, you should do it. And I was like, oh, I should listen to her because I counseled her for 18 years in her life and made her listen to me. So I kind of took it up as a dare.
It's amazing.
And I never thought anybody would listen to what I had to say. And here I am.
Well, I will say that, Zarna does kill as hard as anybody.
Yeah.
Downstairs at the Comedy Cellar. How long have you been doing it?
It will be 3 years.
Oh, so after only 3 years now, I'm in it. Well, I'm not even going to say, but it's bittersweet for me to see Zarna killing up there. I mean, she's a nice woman and all, but 3 years.
Yeah, but 3 years on a stage in New York, to be clear, a lot of us, people like me, had to do comedy to survive for many, many years in real life. That's why a lot of this stuff doesn't scare me. I read Kevin Hart's book. I don't know if you guys have ever read his book, how he started, but very poor, humble upbringing. And a lot of times to get invited, he was the funny one.
Mm.
And that's how he got invited to things.
Zarna, did you read Steve Martin's book?
Yes.
It's very good, right?
Yes. I mean, the comedians are just brilliant people. That's part of what draws me to continue to. I think every comedian is brilliant.
Well, I think you're out of line. Well, I
By the way, when is Ray Ellen coming back on the show?
Well, why are you bringing that up? And
I don't know, something made me think of it.
See, you're a nasty guy.
He likes to stir up trouble.
So Dan, oh shit, I forgot what I was gonna say now. Go ahead. Periel, will you make sure that Lou cuts in a few excerpts of Zarna's comedy? He can take them off YouTube. The show, I think more than any show, like she probably right at the top, like three times. All right, so what else are we going to talk about?
Well, we got the Chappelle thing.
Chappelle and Patton Oswalt.
Yes, well, Patton Oswalt apparently took a picture with Dave Chappelle and posted it on Instagram. Dave Chappelle was performing and called up Patton, said, "Come over, perform with us." I don't know where it was, LA, I guess. Patton posted the picture. That's alliterative. Patton posted the picture. And there's problems from Patton's picture posting as posing problems.
There's a peck of problems in those pictures.
Because Dave obviously is a controversial figure because of his stance. I don't know if it's a stance, but because of his jokes about LGBTQ. So Patton got a lot of blowback from this, and Patton issued an apology. It's very long, but basically I'll try to summarize here. I have it here. He says that he's been friends with, I'm paraphrasing, Chappelle for a long time, but he disagrees with Chappelle on trans rights, but he says that a seeker like Chappelle hasn't stopped evolving and learning. Someone that long, see the struggles and changes. It's impossible to cut them off. Impossible not to be hopeful and open and cheer them on. Also, I've been carrying a lot of guilt about friends I've cut off that had views different than mine. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. There's fiction and I'm sorry, truly sorry that I didn't consider the hurt this would cause or the depth of that hurt. I've been messaging a lot on IG today, Instagram, and the back and forth has really helped guide me in the writing of this. I naively deleted a lot of posts in the comments. Hold on a second. I lost where I was. I naively deleted a lot of posts in the comment thread, critical ones from LGBT writers, and shit posts by TERF, anti-trans. I can't read the rest of this.
Radical feminists. Don't you know anything? Go ahead.
Anyway, so that's the story. So a lot of people are now accusing. First, they were accusing Patton of taking a picture with Dave, and then they're accusing him of throwing Dave under the bus to save his own reputation. So that's you know.
What are your
roughly-
thoughts about it?
Well, my thoughts are, first of all, I don't know, as is always the case in these situations. It's possible that Chappelle and Patton talked, and Chappelle said, look, Patton, you need to save yourself. I love you, but here's what you need to write in order to get these people off your back, and might have done all this with Dave's blessings. That's certainly possible.
I don't think so.
You say no. Okay.
I don't think so. I don't say no.
Another thought is that, you know, he said that he disagrees with Dave about trans rights, but as far as I know, Dave is fully on board with trans rights. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest otherwise. So I think he misspoke in that regard. You know, yeah, I mean, I think Patton's a pretty woke guy anyway, so his fans are probably, you know, like other people like Jim Norton wouldn't have this problem because nobody expects him to be woke. So
Well, that's not the only reason Jim Norton wouldn't have.
yes,
this
all
problem.
right, I guess. but since I think Patton is sort of a woke guy to begin with, he's in this weird situation. Obviously, I would have liked to have seen him say, look, Dave's my friend. We don't agree on everything. That's it. And I think that would have been appropriate to say. And Dave is certainly not anti-trans. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Noam?
I think that, I mean, there was another story we heard from a comic that we all work with, that she was on a bill and there was like a poster of a bunch of pretty well-known comics, and she was going to be on this. She's a well-known comic. She was going to be on this roster of comics, and there was a poster or some promotional material made. And then all of a sudden she got a call. It's like, oh, I'm very sorry. I hope you don't mind that we put you on the same poster as Dave Chappelle. Is that okay? And she got furious and she said, don't ever fucking call me like that again. So I think that should have been Patton Oswalt's response. These people are making me sick with these apologies for associating with Chappelle. Enough. It's terrible, in my opinion.
Well, also, Patton is a guy that's successful enough that he could, you know, his career is, I think, sufficiently successful that he could probably have afforded to say, look, go fuck yourselves. I'm not apologizing. He's a friend of mine. We don't agree on everything. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, he could say, I don't agree. Listen, I don't agree with him about I don't agree with him about the various things he said about trans, but I'm not going to apologize for taking a picture with him. But you know,
Or for being friends with him.
yeah, I mean, these are the same people who say cancel culture doesn't exist. How can you take a picture with Dave Chappelle?
Well, how upset is anybody anyway? No one canceled their Netflix subscription over this.
Right.
This is all faux outrage.
Well,
Let
it could,
people move
yeah,
on.
right. You never really know.
One
With,
thing they could have done that would change things is actually cancel the subscription. That's voting with your wallet and your feet and all of that. But that no one wants to do. They just want to sit and write on.
Yeah, they just want to sit there and make Instagram posts and be horrified. And
well,
then,
Well, they don't even make the post because that's work. They just want to write comments.
well, I mean, that's a point we've made previous on the show, is how much of this outrage is real, how much of it is manufactured and ginned up. And of course, with Louis C.K., there was obviously a lot of outrage on Twitter and elsewhere after the scandal broke a few years ago. But when Noam put him on here at the Comedy Cellar, we didn't see any of that outrage. We saw a couple of people walk out. Most of the people were happy to see Louis.
We saw some outrage at the comedian table. So
Pardon?
listen, we saw some outrage at the comedian table and some cowardice. So I think the Chappelle thing is misunderstood. I think that Chappelle said things which, if you analyze them, if you parse what he said, they're inartful, and he probably wouldn't stand by them if you say, listen, Dave, you said here, blah, blah, blah. Did you mean? Oh, no, I didn't mean that. Because I think we all know that Dave really doesn't have any hostility towards trans people, although he said some things which could be taken as that. But I think what Dave was trying to do was make a point, which was the following, that from his point of view, I said this somewhere else, from his point of view, the world has gone from 0 to 60 in acceptance of the gay community, of the trans community, things that he never in a million years, like, it was just like, it went from 90% of the country was against gay marriage, and it was gay bashing was kind of a joke. So all of a sudden they're like, we're all going to gay weddings, and now it's, and in his mind, all these causes have leapfrogged the cause of his people in a kind of illustration of the systemic racism of the world, as it were. I think that's what he would.
Well, that's his position. I'm not sure I agree with it, but
I got to answer this because it's Liz. But that's the position. That's the point he was trying to make. So it has to be taken at that. Oh, you guys talk. This is the general manager of the comedy. So it's probably something very important.
Uriel Epshtein is here. Hello, Uriel.
Hello.
You can have a seat. Have we met?
Yeah, a couple of times, I believe.
Yes, you look familiar. You can have a seat, by the way. This is Uriel Epshtein. Is it Stein?
Epshtein.
Epshtein. Usually it's Epstein, but he has an H in there, which I've never seen before. But yeah, you know.
Adamant.
Uriel, this is Zarna Garg, who's a comedian that works here quite frequently now. She's become a new favorite here.
Good to meet you.
Nice
And
to meet
she
you.
is an Indian American, and she brings that perspective to the stage, which is something we have a lot of comedians that are Indian, but none of them that were actually born and raised in India. So she brings that to the table that Aziz, for example, does not bring, or others. What's that guy's name? Nimesh Patel, for example. Anyway, Uriel Epshtein is the executive director of the Renew Democracy Initiative, an organization founded by former chess world champion Garry Kasparov and dedicated to defending the values of liberal democracy in the U.S. and around the world. Welcome, Uriel, to our show. Noam asked for you to be on, so I know he has questions for you, but he is on the phone with Liz, the general manager. So whilst he is dealing with that, we'll talk amongst ourselves.
Sounds reasonable.
What are you up to these days? Or do you have anything specific that you came on here to promote or to discuss?
Well, I'm sure Noam would have things that he would want to make fun of me for, but generally
A little closer to the mic, if you please.
all right.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh,
Hi,
all
Uriel.
right,
Go
he's
ahead.
back.
Sorry.
He's back. Thank God, because this is a Noam guest, and I was flustering a little bit because I'm not exactly sure why Noam wanted to have him on.
Well, he actually he's a friend of mine, and he has a thing he's doing, a political thing he's doing. It's which it's about essentially Republicans who can't stand Donald Trump, and they want to make sure he never gets anywhere near the White House again, and they're organizing. So
I'll just I'll amend that a little bit in the sense that we are actually strictly nonpartisan. We are neither Republicans nor Democrats. We have both, right? We have both, former Democratic senators involved, as well as the former head of the Republican National Committee.
who are some of the Democrats?
Senator Heidi Heitkamp, Senator Bob Kerrey, as well as a number of others who generally have center left political views.
Okay. So what unifies you guys?
Belief in liberal democracy, a belief in the process that allows us to disagree productively without killing each other.
And is this indicative of the fact that some of these left of center former senators think the Democratic Party or that has gone too far left and don't believe those things?
I think it's indicative of an understanding that there are extremes on the left and there are extremes on the right that want to, that don't necessarily want to prioritize the processes that allow us to come to productive political decisions. So in other words, there are folks on the very far left who believe that America is in some way irredeemably oppressive, right? Who believe that America is a force for ill and that it needs to be stopped. That essentially this idea that America can improve people's lives, both domestically and internationally, is either something that's outdated or, quite frankly, something that was never true. And that's an incredibly dangerous thing. This idea that we cannot, we can't make things better. Bill Clinton once very famously said that there's nothing that's wrong with American democracy that can't be fixed by what's right with American democracy. And I think at the core, the core ethos that, these Democratic senators, as well as everybody else on our board of directors, believes is that. And the project, I think that you referenced at the very beginning, where we is one where we brought together dissidents from oppressive countries from around the world. We brought together 52 dissidents from 28 oppressive countries, specifically to convey that message from people who have never had democracy in their home countries, or people who have had democracy at a certain point and then witnessed its fall, because they actually offer a really unique voice that I think a lot of Americans haven't heard before. because they've looked to American democracy for inspiration. Anyway, so that's kind of our vision, is that American democracy has been and can remain a force for good, even while recognizing some of its flaws.
So this is always interesting. So you're an immigrant, Zarna, you're an immigrant.
Yep.
India is a democracy, right?
In theory,
Freedom House, I think, has a back and forth right now.
it's
when you hear him talking about American democracy and the goodness of it and all that jazz, what forgive me, what's the bubble over your head as an Indian immigrant?
So I've made some jokes about this in my latest set about how like you do all this work to come here because democracy and you're free, and then you find out that everybody hates everybody here. Like that's the first realization you have as an outsider. Even though there is freedom relative to anywhere else, you can get on a stage here and trash your president. You can't do that in most other countries, and certainly not the part of the world that I come from.
Now, what year would you say? What year did you come here, Zarna?
1992.
Now, in 1992, you didn't feel that everyone hates everybody, did you?
Well, if you're outside and your only exposure to American life is Hollywood, which is true for a lot of the rest of the world, it is eye-opening, the amount of acrimony that exists here. You don't expect it. Of course, the last few years, it's reached its own peak and it's hit new peaks. But I remember being surprised, thinking, wow, why are they all fighting on TV? I thought they all got along and went out to dinner every night.
Where did you come to? What part of the States?
So of Akron, Ohio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the rubber capital
That should
of
be
the world.
pretty.
Yeah.
So
That's not introductory America either. That's advanced America.
I got dropped in there. Yeah.
What were you doing in Akron?
So I the only person willing to help me get a visa to come here was a congressman in Ohio who said if I enrolled in university there, because at the time international students were uncommon, like full paying international students. So he allowed me to come if I agreed to enroll at the University of Akron.
Oh.
Otherwise, getting a visa to the US is not easy. It's a very difficult, right?
Oh, I mean, I'm aware. Luckily, I was born here, but my parents immigrated from the former Soviet
It's
Union.
a fight. Like it's like a lot of strategy, a lot of fighting. That's why I do all the jokes about immigrant, because it's not, I wasn't born here as a child. I had to fight to find my way to get here. And that's a whole,
But there's a really rich vein of potential jokes here. I mean, I remember growing up on these stories of Stalin and the evils of the Soviet Union and communism and how lucky I was, and how if I didn't behave, if I didn't eat my vegetables, if I didn't get an A, I'd be sent back to Russia or
My God, that's
whatever.
horrible.
oh no, that's
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I said you were an immigrant. You've told me before that you were born here. You have a slight accent, so I always forget it.
I'm also the son of immigrants. My parents came here in a Ford from Canada.
Yeah, not as that's not as that tale is not made for movies. Not as
no,
yeah.
I mean, no, not when you get in a car and cross the border, but they are, I am first generation technically.
Noam is too. So am I.
I mean, can I ask you a question? So, I mean, you went to Yale and you know a lot. Is American history really in some way notable for our blemishes as opposed to Chinese, Japanese, Russian, English? Like, is there something Indian? Is there something about us that we need to be particularly ashamed of over and above the general?
Probably more so than Canada, I would say.
About the general observation that but Canada, hasn't had these things. But anyway, Canada's just benefited from it. But the general observation that the human race is horrible and has been horrible, is progressively getting a little bit better, but our instincts have not changed, and we try to keep them reined in. And America did bad things, but like, what are we different than other countries?
Well, actually, I would argue that what makes us different is not that we have these, some kind of unique blemishes of things to be ashamed of, but rather the very fact that we are so self-reflective, that we are willing to recognize the flaws and try to combat them and try to address them and try to improve upon them. That's actually what makes us unique, not the flaws themselves. Those flaws are absolutely ubiquitous. And for what it's worth, Canada has a fair share of them too. In fact, just recently, I think they passed a bill with $30+ billion in funding for Indigenous families who are harmed as a result of the foster care system. So, I mean, there are flaws. And again, that doesn't make Canada unique in any way. I mean, all countries have flaws, just like all people have flaws. The question is, how do those nations deal with those flaws? Canada, like the US, recognized that mistakes were made and made progress to address them. Meanwhile, you have right now the ruling party in Poland, which has outlawed serious academic research and scholarship into what was going on in Poland during the Holocaust.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can I answer that too, Noam? Because
please go ahead.
I not only second everything that he just said, and I'm gonna put a plug in for my comedy, which I do right here at the Cellar 6 nights a week. I love reminding the American audience how amazing America is. That's how every set of mine ends. I need the audience to leave elated, because the amount of self-reflection that goes on here is enough to drive anybody crazy. There are entire countries where genocide is happening right now as we speak, and the whole world knows. And forget apologizing for it. They're not even going to acknowledge it. They're going to hide it. They're going to do everything they can. Well, here, things, because of the way the freedom of the press does exist, everything's out in the open, and the country feels bad altogether collectively. Where else do you see that? Never. It's unprecedented. And if you come to any of my shows at the Comedy Cellar, you will leave amazed.
I do think, the French are, they have a lot of guilt about colonialism in North Africa. And obviously the Germans have a lot of guilt about World War II.
Do they?
Oh, yes. I think they're not even allowed legally to deny the Holocaust in Germany. You're not allowed to. The swastika is illegal as opposed to the United States. I could wear a swastika. It's not illegal, but it is there. And as an American who's into freedom of speech, I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but in any case, yeah, they're obviously.
But that's the distinction isn't between different liberal democracies, right? And I use liberal, of course, in the classical sense of the word, right? Not meaning left or right, but simply in the sense of pluralistic, open societies with free speech, press, assembly, and so forth. Countries like Japan, Canada, Germany, France, all these countries have all of those things, and therefore today have I would say a fair bit of self-reflection and a fair bit of openness about it. And the real distinction, which I think Americans frequently lose sight of, is the distinction between free countries and unfree countries. And that distinction is huge right now. I mean, according to Freedom House, depending on how you define India, actually, India is really the crux of this, anywhere from 60 to 80% of the world's population lives in a not entirely free country, or rather an unfree country.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so that's the distinction that I think a lot of Americans fail to recognize, and not just Americans. I mean, people in general who are born and raised in freedom, they fail to recognize how unique that freedom is.
Oh, I would even say that, I would even say it even further than that, even to the extent that India is unfree. It's less unfree than it even would be if America didn't exist. Just the gravitational force of America in the world prevents things from spinning too far in that direction.
100%.
Yeah.
I'd like to take this podcast. I will offer you to join us as a Freedom Fellow for our Front Lines of Freedom project. That's exactly the perspective we have.
She get her to perform at some event. They would love her. She's perfect for that.
You'll be welcome to.
You'll do it for free.
We'll talk about it after the podcast. Oh, no, that's binding. No, this is all being recorded. That is a verbal agreement. It is binding.
I
because
just offered to perform in that case, because I'm just sitting here saying nothing.
I think that, first of all, this, we got a lot of mileage argument wise over the last 5 years. Americans don't know this. Americans don't know. They're not taught this. They're not taught that about the history. But you know what? We're basically coming to the law of diminishing returns on that argument, because we all know, everybody knows. Anybody doesn't know America's history at this point is living under a rock. So now that everybody knows, now what? Now where do we go from here?
You contextualize it.
Now that we got our pound of flesh, because and I'm not for a second arguing that people shouldn't know. I just suspect that people always did know. I mean, maybe, somewhere in the deep South, there was a curriculum which we should have been ashamed of, and it's good that they changed it. But at this point, I think everybody basically knows America's past. But I wonder if psychologically, just it's possible for a nation to flourish without the fiction, even one way or another, of that is people think that it's a great nation. Like how can we ever accomplish anything if we think we suck? And we don't suck. I mean, I can make the objective case that we don't suck, but even if we have to pretend that we didn't suck, it's what is the end game here? What are they trying to accomplish by just getting everybody to hate the country? Is it going to make people have more money? Poor people?
I don't think the vast majority of America thinks that they suck. It's a loud minority that goes crazy on Twitter and social media. I think if you ask most American people, they probably think that they're decent, good people trying to survive just like everybody else in the world.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think what we're seeing right now is this false dichotomy between, one very, very loud minority saying that America is one of the most evil countries in the world, and another very, very loud minority that wants to pretend that America is absolutely perfect and nothing has ever gone wrong, right? This idea, that somebody pointed out, the 1619 project versus the 1776 commission, where, one of them, of course, painted America as one of the most evil things ever. And then the other one painted America as an absolute angel that never made any mistakes. And of course, the truth is in between. The truth is that we're a flawed nation that has generally strived to improve upon itself. And, there have been significant steps back in the interim, but generally speaking, it has trended towards good. And I think that's a story that's, on the one hand, difficult to tell because it's complicated, it's nuanced, but at the same time, that's also, quite frankly, what the Renew Democracy Initiative is all about. Our very mission is about conveying a nuanced story about American democracy and how we can defend it and fight for it in a way that recognizes the flaws while simultaneously believing in its capacity for good.
Well, I hope you can make some progress. I mean, just recently, the New York State released a regulation. You saw this about there's a shortage of these antiviral drugs. What's it called? Paxlovid? I don't know. So you saw this, right, Uriel? So the regulations are that you can get this drug if you have COVID symptoms and serious comorbidities, or if you have COVID symptoms and you're not white. I'm not misstating it. It's exactly what it says. So that, for instance, my friend Coleman, I joked to him because he had COVID this week.
You're talking about Coleman Hughes, right?
Yeah, Coleman Hughes, a young, healthy, very healthy Black guy. I'm like, Coleman, you should go get those. You should go get those antivirals. You could sell them. You could sell them to some sick white people. But but the notion that in America, and forget about African Americans, they're defining Asians, who, to my knowledge, are the most successful group in America, more successful than whites, and had the least COVID, right? And are the most vaccinated. They're defining being Asian as a comorbidity for life-saving drugs. Now, this is America gone off the rails. This isn't America. This is like a caste system. This is more like India, right? This is crazy, except it's reverse. I mean, should we just say that this is meaningless? Like, I don't want to overblow it. Is it really just like, oh, it's just some wacky politicians or wacky doctors trying to curry favor? Or is it real? Is it something that we really need to fight against, or it will be our future? I don't know. What do you think, Uriel?
I mean, it's a question of magnitude, right? Like, I think, I used to be a consultant. So the first question we would ask is, well, what's the size of the prize, right? How prevalent is this approach? So first, I mean, needless to say, I think that approach is terrible. I do not think we should be basing decisions like this off of people's, racial, demographic, or whatever other identity. They should be based they should be based on
how bad you need the drug.
Right. But so anyway, so first the question is like, how prevalent is this? And I actually don't know that answer. So I think that would be, one, the first interesting question to ask. But the other one also is to recognize that that this is something we need to be addressing. So in other words, I don't think we should just ignore it and try to sweep it under the rug. For better or for worse, I do think this is something that will resonate with people, whether for good or for ill. In other words, it'll either alienate a lot of people and make them very angry and try to push them to the other extreme, or there are other people who will look at that and will say, like, this makes sense. Let's actually do more of this. And obviously, both of those reactions are dangerous. So what we want to do is we want to contextualize it and basically say, look, we can recognize that there are people in certain communities who have been disadvantaged, whom we need to think about in a particular way and whom we need to help, without just being reductive and saying anyone who isn't white, should get X, Y, or Z, systemic advantage either. So, I think there is a nuanced way to approach this, where we say that the approach is where we say that the policy is wrong, but it's also not, the oncoming of communism or something.
Right. So I'm beginning to wonder if the nuanced answers to all this thing, this hypersensitivity, is not a mistake, as opposed to saying absolutely not. This is not going to happen in America. You get drugs, you get life-saving drugs based on how much you need life-saving drugs, period. And yes, we have various issues you may want to raise. They have no place in a triage medical situation. And no, sorry, skedaddle, because to normalize this way of thinking is very, very, very dangerous. And to have to answer with hat in hand as to, like, no, I don't want to be insensitive about why I tell you just because you're perfectly healthy, you shouldn't get drugs because you're Asian. Like, it's so absurd, and it's so against everything this country stands for. And this country can't survive that kind of thought. This is a knife to the throat of the country. We already had COVID aid given out to businesses that were owned by non-whites, and this is what's so insidious about it, is that if you are on the bad end of this rule, for instance, I'll give two things. Hear me out. So if you want to organize politically against this rule, are you supposed to organize as white people? Like, and that is horrible. Now you're going to start asking, I don't mean to organize with white people. I think I should be allowed to get the drug just like everybody else. And you've decided it's white people. So now all of a sudden white people have a rational reason to start organizing as white people for this, white people for that, white people for equal medical care. And here's the other part, which I think is even worse. If you didn't get Mike's son is 1/4 this and 1/8 that, but he looks white. Let's say he goes to the hospital and they're like, no, I'm sorry, you're not eligible for this drug. And he says, you know what? I was fucking eligible for this drug, and I'm going to have a lawsuit. Now he goes to court, and now the court has to define race. They have to say, yes, you were entitled to this drug, or no, you weren't. Well, how do I know you were entitled? Well, how about, I get it. How about a 1-drop rule? So I don't know if Zarna knows, there used to be a 1-drop rule that if you had 1 drop of Negro blood, right, you were considered, I think that's what it was. Am I right? I think that's what the 1-drop rule was.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But so the left now is backing into the necessity of defining race for legal purposes. And this is not a crazy thing I'm saying. There's a regulation right out there now, and it can lead to a lawsuit tomorrow. And exactly what I'm saying could happen. And imagine having now the left they're already embracing kind of separate but equal, these in schools and stuff. And now they want to embrace legal definitions of race for government, for healthcare, 1-drop rules. This is really, really dangerous, I think. Yeah.
I think any policy that engages in any form of race essentialism, right, saying that the key element of your identity is your race, is a bad policy, right? Generally speaking, given our incredibly horrific history with policies that, used race as a key identity characteristic, I think at this point we can safely say, look, if a policy is based exclusively on race, then this is a very dangerous policy. Now, where we can be nuanced here isn't to somehow be mealy-mouthed about that. We can be very direct, and say, look, this is wrong. But the nuance comes in as to the scale of the problem. In other words, my intuition is that this problem isn't something that's ubiquitous, right? I think that it exists. It exists. It sounds like in New York. I actually know him. I did not know about that, the policy about those drugs. So that's news to me. But I do know that it existed, I believe, in New Hampshire as well. I think it was New Hampshire. I don't remember which.
It was Vermont for the vaccines.
Vermont. Yeah, for the vaccine. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it existed. But now, of course, how many non-white people actually live in Vermont, right? So, Arguably that policy there was really much more about virtue signaling than anything else. But anyway, so the point of the nuance here is,
let me interrupt you there, because that's really the point I was trying to make before. It's not so much about whether anybody actually is ever denied for the drug. It's normalizing an approach to everything. And you see, there's COVID aid. Okay, well, we better make sure that the white people are separated from non-white people in the way that's administered. Now we have drugs to give it out. Okay, I mean, it's becoming the ordinary course of business now for the government to start conceiving of things it's doing in terms of race, and it's teaching us to think this way, and it's spreading, and sooner or later it will turn out. I mean, listen, it's not crazy to say right now, not only was somebody white could die, but somebody black. When you have a scarcity of pills, if you give it to young, healthy people of color because they're people of color, and then you run out of pills, you will not have pills left to give to sick people of color who need them. This was eventually what tanked, because the CDC had wanted to prioritize race, remember? And then Matt Iglesias made the point. CDC had wanted to prioritize race for vaccines, and then Matt Iglesias, among others, but he got a lot of notice about it on Twitter. He made the point that mathematically, if you prioritize race as opposed to age and comorbidities, more Black people would die of COVID by having to wait than otherwise. So it backfires for that reason as well. So I just think it's terrible. But
I mean, look, I agree. I think the question is just how much, I just want to be careful that we don't overemphasize it, in the sense that it is a problem. I just don't think it is the defining problem that we face as a democracy today. I think that's definitely more of a longer term problem. It's one thing, it's something that will be growing over time, but it's not the thing that, I believe threatens us most today, especially given that tomorrow is January 6th, right? I mean, so when I think of, the immediate threat, the thing that I'm most scared about tomorrow, it has more to do with maintaining free and fair elections, ensuring that results are respected, and so forth, which isn't to say that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, you can recognize that there's an immediate threat while simultaneously recognizing that there's also a long-term threat that, if it remains unaddressed, can also become an immediate threat, just maybe not today, but 5 or 10 years down the road. So anyway, I mean, I think we have to, that's our challenge right now when we're fighting for liberalism. Do
you think that Trump had a path towards overthrowing that election?
No, I don't. But it's not about, it wasn't about that election, right? It's not a failed coup, a failed insurrection is really just a practice attempt. If nothing.
You're talking about the January 6th riot?
I'm talking about the January 6th riot, and I'm also not just that. The January 6th riot is not the
insurrection, whatever you want to call it.
Right, whatever. The January 6th riot is obviously incredibly scary, but it's the culmination of things. I mean, it's not the riot itself that scares the crap out of me. It's the lies, the media narrative, it's all of that led to the insurrection. Because I'll be honest, right? If I were to believe all the lies that came out of Trump's mouth, it's actually not unreasonable to do what the rioters did, right? I mean, these are folks many of whom I imagine genuinely believed the lies they were being fed. And if you're being told that the election was stolen, and that through Biden becoming president, that's actually a coup, it's not unreasonable to say, well, I'm going to defend the true government by opposing the election of, or rather the installation of what I perceive to be a tyrant. So really the thing that's most dangerous to me is not the individual rioters, it's the lies that led them to the Capitol on that day. And what's also scaring me a lot, and what people aren't actually talking a lot about this, you see a lot of folks talking about voter suppression and things like that. And I actually happen to agree that those are threats. But the thing that scares me even more than that actually are the changes in the way votes can be counted, both on the state level, where you actually have a lot of state legislatures taking power over counting the votes. So they will say, well, instead of having a nonpartisan organization or whatever count the votes, actually it's going to be a partisan legislature which will certify the election and count the votes. And that's really scary, because that means, so basically what happened in Georgia, right, where you had Raffensperger.
Wait, go ahead.
Yeah.
I just want to stop you there for a minute, because I don't want to get.
First of all, Zarna, what time do you need to be on stage? I don't want to keep you.
I have 2 more minutes.
Okay.
But yeah.
I just want to go back to January 6th because we're out of time. So I just want to say where I agree with you and where I don't disagree with you, because we may not have time for more than this.
Sure.
I think that
Let me,
They
you know,
made it-
Zarna doesn't have much time. I just don't want to get some plugs in for her if I could.
go ahead.
Zarna, of course, she's a regular here at the Comedy Cellar. She'll be headline. Can we plug another club in New York, Noam, or is that verboten?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll cut it out. Go ahead.
She'll be headlining at Caroline's on Broadway on February 4th and starts touring the nation in February and she'll be at the Comedy Cellar in Vegas in February as well. And
Nice.
she'll be at the Kennedy Center in March. Oh, well, that's interesting. What are you doing at the Kennedy Center?
I'm gonna be with Maz Jobrani.
Are you opening for Maz?
Yes.
Okay, she's opening for Maz at the Kennedy Center.
Yeah, it's also the Iranian New Year that weekend.
The Iranian New Year? Is Maz Iranian?
Yep.
Okay.
Persian New Year.
Persian New Year. So if you don't have plans for Persian New Year yet, the Kennedy Center is the place to be.
So can I talk about January 6th now?
Okay.
It's a natural. This is a natural transition.
Hey, Zarna.
Well, Zarna has to be on stage at your club in a couple.
Wait, just say where everybody can find you online, Zarna.
Oh, at
Oh my
Zarna
God.
Garg everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, and zarnagarg.com.
I continue to think that having to tell people how to find you. I mean, everybody has Google. It's like just Google Zarna Garg. You find everything. Like they're not going to write down, oh, what's her Instagram? It's like you're like Zarna Garg Instagram. Zarna Garg. I'm like, come on. Anyway, it's become a formality. So I think that January 6th is way overblown, and consequently, the other stuff you're talking about is being under-recognized. So
Zarna
Trump
Garg, thank you for coming. She's off to
Hi,
perform.
Zarna. Trump had a strategy to pressure test not just laws, which had never really been put to the test before, but formalities that no one had ever even conceived of being anything less than just rubber stamp formalities. And we know this. Pence had said to him in his letter to Nancy Pelosi that Trump had pressured him to exceed his constitutional authority. This was a clear, impeachable, and very, very, very dangerous thing that Trump was doing. Very dangerous. And January 6th, that riot undercut Trump's threat enormously. Trump didn't want these people to, he wanted to protest out there for political reasons. He wasn't happy. I mean, he might have been ego happy, but this was not part of the strategy to have these thugs and lunatics occupy the Capitol building. And amazingly, the Democrats latched onto it. Rather than impeach him for exceeding his constitutional authority, they impeach him for a speech, which he's allowed to make a speech, and he never called for violence. And these people had planned the violence prior. We know they were planning the violence prior to Trump's speech, so Trump's speech couldn't have incited it. But they've latched onto this as if this were really a threat to a democracy. And I think that this violent thing has nothing to do with the actual threat to democracy. As a matter of fact, it probably impeded what was and Peter Navarro wrote as much in his book. They had a plan going, and this upended that plan. So they could not have been happy about it. And I do not think, what if they had occupied that Capitol building and were still there today? Would that have anything to do with government? Would that have affected the transfer of power in any way? No, it would have just been these idiots occupied a building. The real threat is what you say, is that they figured out a way to test and to find the flaws in these rules, which we had never considered to be more than formalities. And unless we fix this shit, now these cracks are exposed. And we need to fix it, right? It has nothing to do with the violence. And I don't know. That's all.
Well, I mean, look, and now that I'm thinking back to it, I think we have talked about this a little bit in the past, and I think we agree on more than we disagree. But I mean, obviously we do disagree to a certain extent about the day of January 6th itself. So one, with respect to Trump being happy or unhappy about it, I mean, look, I don't pretend to know what's in that guy's heart or in his head. I have no idea. I do know that there's now plenty of evidence that he had multiple opportunities to try to prevent it or to speak out and to try to tell his people to back
Try to
down.
end it,
And
not prevent it, to end it.
to end it, rather, yes. Well, even to prevent it. I mean, look, I would argue that his speech did play a role in incitement, right? I mean, he at a certain point, a reasonable person could have looked at that speech and could have seen sending the people down to the Capitol, in the way that he did.
But nobody did say that in real time. Nobody noticed at the time. But the point is, we know that the day before they were planning it, so it can't be the speech.
So, well, anyway, I don't want to get it too much into those levels of details, because the key here is what you pointed out with respect to the rules, right? The fact that Trump was able to take advantage of rules that people never even thought about, like you said, many of them. So
formalities.
They're formalities, right? Like the Electoral Count Act is one of the things that allowed this whole thing to happen, right? I mean, that's the act that essentially determines how Congress can adjudicate disagreements about slates of electors from different states, so on and so forth. It's from 1887. It's a vague law that most folks have never even heard of before. Certainly, people never really thought of January 6th as an important date, even because it's really traditionally just a formality. Nobody thought about the vice president's role during this entire process, because the vice president has no role other than one that's a formality.
A rubber stamp.
So those things, I think, are the things that really threaten our rule of law the most, right? So one, we need to reform the Electoral Count Act. So that's kind of one of the top things that I believe it's really important. And that, the Renew Democracy Initiative, we just put out a petition calling for reforms to that law to essentially get rid of it and change it. So people can find that on our website. So that's one. Two is we need to be thinking about how are votes being counted on state, within states, right? Because if within a state, like in Georgia, for example, right, Trump was on the phone with Raffensperger asking him to find whatever it was, right, 11,000+ votes, because that's exactly the margin of Biden's victory in that state. Based on Georgia's law right now, the way they changed those laws, Raffensperger has no power anymore, or he would not have power in that instance. And Trump would be able to go to someone who actually would say yes, who might have tried to do what Trump asked them to do. And that's something that scares the crap out of me. And so that's something that we need to be thinking about and fighting. So that's number two. It's thinking about how are votes being counted on the state level and making sure that election certification and vote counting is taken out of the hands of partisan legislatures and given to bipartisan or nonpartisan commissions, which will be able to count the votes.
We got to keep it less detailed because of the audience. But I agree with you. I would say that what we know now is that all the people around Trump were telling him, you got to stop this. You got to stop this. When the riot started, his daughter, his son, the people around him, his chief of staff. And he seemed to take some egotistical pleasure in seeing what these people were ready to do in his name, because he's a sicko. Well, but the people who were thinking strategically clearly recognized immediately that this was a mistake. But here's the thing.
But here's the thing that really scares the shit out of me, right? Within a few days, for about a week or two, almost everyone unanimously said that January 6th was horrific, that it was dangerous, and that it needed to be condemned, right? For about 2 weeks. And then starting with the third week, you have Kevin McCarthy going down to Mar-a-Lago and, shaking Trump's hand, taking a photo with him, and essentially saying that January 6th was actually not that big a deal, despite the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, he had said that Trump bears responsibility. And so my fear about that whole day isn't just about what happened on the day, but the fact that we went from essentially agreeing that it was a bad thing to having a significant percentage of people saying, well, actually, it's not that big a deal. It was just, I forgot which congressman said this. I think it was Paul Gosar, might have been someone else. Oh, well, it was just a normal tourist day, on Capitol Hill.
I don't want to sound naive, and then we got to wrap it up. I have a great faith that I don't know how far they can take this. I don't know how crazy some small state might be, but I have a great faith that the checks and balances, in this case, the judicial check, is not going to allow American elections to be overruled or to become unfair. Although these people might put us through a lot of chaos and mess and mess is really the word in that process when it finally gets thwarted by the courts. But in the end, I don't think it can really happen in America. I'm not going to say it's 100% can't happen, but I don't think it really happened. I think in the end, the bigger threat to America, and they can both be threats. You know, it's sad that we have to offset them or compare them to each other. But what people believe can rip this country apart. What people believe about each other, about the nation, about racial matters, about class matters, whatever it is, these things cannot be overruled by a court. And a country can come apart if the people no longer want to be a country or no longer feel affinity towards each other as a country. I don't think the country can come apart because some unscrupulous politicians fuck around with the electoral system and then get slapped down, which is inevitable. They're going to get slapped down.
You're more optimistic than I am, but Noam, come on. Where's your Jewishness?
The Supreme Court of the United States is not going to say, yep, you don't have to have free elections anymore. That's just not going to happen. But the Supreme Court of the United States will have no say in an America that has retreated into ethnic and racial divisions against itself. They can't impact that. Except on the outside. So
I
that's
think
all
we need to wrap it up there.
What's that?
I think we should probably put a
Yes,
put a
yes.
bow on it. Nicole.
Let him give the details of his initiative.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just add, by the way, I agree with that fear, and I'll add one additional fear to it, which is that a huge percentage, relatively speaking, of Americans right now believe that the 2020 election was illegitimate, which is absolutely horrifying as a
And
statistic.
60 and the same percentage of Democrats believe that 2016 had been illegitimate. You know that.
Well,
Precisely.
anyway, that's
Check
a
the
longer
polls.
conversation.
Google percent of Democrats don't believe Trump was fairly legitimately elected. It was close to 60%. Democrats, go ahead.
Longer conversation. Anyway, so quickly plugging Renew Democracy Initiative. You can find us at rdi.org. And basically we're out there trying to fight for classical liberal democratic principles and trying to mobilize people in defense of, a community that as Noam pointed out, doesn't hate each other. And so we're trying to educate folks and mobilize people and build that community where we can actually coexist, even if and when we disagree, which, believe me, many of us have huge disagreements with one another. But the thing that brings us together is a belief that we as the United States can come together and support free and fair elections and support basically our democracy. So with that, I'll drop.
Well, as long as an asteroid doesn't hit, I'm optimistic. Thank you.
Yes.
I thought you would seem like you wanted to say something.
No, I'm
Nicole, this was we had a sort of two different conversations. Which what are your thoughts? Did you enjoy them both in equal measure?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. I mean, I was really excited to see Zarna here. I've seen her around, but didn't really know much about her work. So it was cool to learn about her and her life.
And of course, Uriel.
Yeah, of course. That's always, I mean, that is way beyond my level of comprehension. So I do struggle to keep up a little, but it's interesting to see different people's opinions.
Thank you so much for listening. Podcast at comedycellar.com. Let us know what you think. More comedy talk, more political talk, or are we doing it just right?
Uriel, I'll speak to you Monday.
And
Sounds good.
We'll speak to you next time. Bye-bye.